Chelsea go to Porto in the Champions League this week, and of course with Jose Mourinho, that's an emotional return to the club where he really forged his reputation. It wasn't the first club where he was a coach, but it was probably the first club where he could really express himself as a manager. It was there that his philosophy was formed. Mourinho had a very brief spell at Benfica, and various problems with the board, and he left after only around about a month. He went to União de Leiria, which is a small struggling club. He did very well there, and perhaps that reinforced in him the idea that pragmatism was important. You couldn't always play great, beautiful football. His big break comes when he goes to Porto in February of 2002. That's the first chance he gets with a properly big club where he can really impose his ideas, he can really express what his philosophy is. And you see immediately it's very different to that of Barcelona. That although they pressed high up the field, although they played passing football, although he was very focused on triangles, talk to any player from that team and they will all say the thing was they had to win. Winning was absolutely key, and Mourinho would do what he had to do to achieve that. And that would include winding up opposition managers in press conferences, putting pressure on referees, all the tactics we see from him now, all those off-field things. That was Mourinho's role. The players played, and that was what he could do. They would play 4-3-3 in the league. In the Champions League and the UEFA Cup the season before that, they occasionally switched to a midfield diamond. Certainly by the time they got to the Champions League final in 2004 when they beat Monaco, that was a very, very clear diamond.
One of the bottle. I think I'm a special one.
When Mourinho got to Chelsea, he initially tried to play that same diamond that he used at Porto, using Frank Lampard at the tip of the diamond, behind Drogba and Gudjonsson. He also occasionally could play up front. Gradually though, over that season, over 2004-05, that evolved into the 4-3-3 that became much more familiar. Makelele sitting deep at the back of midfield, Lampard to his left making those forward runs late, and then to the right, either Alexis Mertin or Thiago Mendes, just adding the dynamism that allowed Lampard to make those runs. Right the way through his career, the same principles have applied. Training is very, very similar, the warm-up drills are very, very similar. That Mourinho, again, very early in his Chelsea career, he laid out that he had four main things he looked at when he was training. He did attack, he did defence, he did the transition from attack to defence, and he did the transition from defence to attack. And that remains true today. If things had worked out differently, Mourinho could easily have ended up back at Barcelona. They had 9 criteria that they went through. Guardiola could tick 8 of those, Mourinho only 6. The 2 he fell down on were youth development and presenting the image the club wanted to in the press. But he went to Inter, played a 4-3-1-2, played a very pragmatic style, his defence sat very deep. This was a move away from that hard pressing that he'd played at times at Porto. It was a move away from the Barcelona style of hard pressing. And of course this all comes to a head in that great semi-final in 2010 when Barcelona, having lost 3-1 at Inter, can only win 1-0 in the Nou Camp. As Mourinho essentially says, we don't need the ball to play. They had 19% possession that day. This was Mourinho saying, okay, I was an outsider when I was at Barcelona. Now I've gone beyond that. I'm not just an outsider, I'm not just somebody who's not in a circle. I'm actually the absolute opposite to what Barcelona stand for. The other thing that semi-final victory at the Camp Nou did was to persuade Florentino Perez that Mourinho was the one man who could stop Guardiola's Barcelona. What happened? His first Clásico, he loses 5-0. That 5-0 defeat to Guardiola's Barcelona had a major effect on Mourinho. That persuaded him he couldn't engage him in open conflict. He had to be smarter, he had to be nastier. That's when those games became incredibly unpleasant. These great battles in which football was almost forgotten. Against other teams, Mourinho would often play a 4-2-3-1, and essentially he was building a platform to let Ronaldo play. In the big games, he began to use what he called the trivote. So that's taking the idea of the pivot, the holding midfielder, but playing 3 of them, so trivot. A name was first used of the Italy team in the '98 World Cup. If you read Diego Torres' book, it seems that gradually players began to resent that. They felt that they were better than that. They felt they could take Barcelona on. But in his second season, Mourinho wins the league. What happens then is in the third season, as it had at Chelsea, things begin to go wrong. Now there's various theories to why that could be, but it appears that the abrasiveness of Mourinho, the way he needs to build this atmosphere in which paranoia is a dominant emotion, where he's saying that everybody's against me, everybody's against my club, that eventually becomes very wearing. And the players felt embarrassed, according to Diego Torres, that they had to go along with this. But that was part of this whole process of making the richest club in the world seem like a victim. I think at Chelsea this season, there's been a lot of stories, a lot of rumours coming out. The players have been unhappy with the way certain things have been presented to the press, and particularly with the Eva Carneiro issue.
I'm the happy one.
When Mourinho came back to Chelsea for this second stint, he talked about wanting to build a dynasty. He felt that was the thing he hadn't done. He won silverware, but he'd never laid foundations for a great empire. And yet, in the third season, we see that the tensions build up. We see he's under pressure. We see him snapping at people. And the suspicion is that perhaps again, the third season will prove fatal for Mourinho. The formation this time at Chelsea has been 4-2-3-1 pretty much throughout. That's very much a template. I think more interesting is the way that that's used and the fact that the outside players in the three, they have to be dynamic, they have to be prepared to track back. And that's why Mata was sold on, and it's why Willian is such a favourite in Mourinho, that he does have that strength and determination to get up and down. And Azar, I think you've seen a change in him as a player, that he always had technical ability, but he now has that willingness to work back. And that's what he had to develop to become a Mourinho player. And what that allows Mourinho to do is, if they're playing against a team who can defend deep, then Willian and Azar can play right up with Oscar behind the centre forward. And you've got four players tight on the opposition's defence. Against a better side, a side who wants to dominate possession, they can sit off, and they can essentially do what Inter did to Barcelona in that 2010 semi. They can say, you have the ball, you'll make a mistake eventually, and when you do, we'll score. He has perhaps got a bit of an issue that if this comes to an end, where does he go next? He probably can't go back to Real Madrid, though those bridges have been burned. Similarly at Inter, he certainly can't go to Barcelona. There's not many super clubs left who would take him.